Augusta.
Carlos is going to present.
Augusta's going to be starting off, so we'll just wait till she gets back in and then.
We're going to try this recording for the missions because the only tool that we have within the agency only screen shares. So we're going to actually see the face. Cool.
Yep. Everyone pull up. We're starting to the second, and she's going to introduce the.
Oh yeah. Let's find her next
That would be great. I think definitely once they get back from Uganda, we should take advantage of that. The only time that we've been able to do that is through an external contractor.
Well, they have a contract mechanism, but they're inside eight, so they're five people in.
Brian Stout, yeah.
Yeah, Brian Stout.
Cool.
Up in but, yeah, they do that sort of support, and then you get it saved there into a program that
Exactly.
missions have more access.
Exactly.
Any to the lab?
Actually, I don't think we
I wasn't ready to do that. Okay. Who's recording?
So, I think potential people who might see it are some folks from missions, but other than that, I think it's the folks that are in the data working group. I'm not sure we need to give an intro to the lab, but maybe just do this program.
Yeah, so the brief intro to we're still calling it a mission ethnography, although what it really is going to be an in-depth look at the use of data and information throughout the program study at a mission level, focusing on the program cycle as sort of the nexus of the process that we're going to be studying. And so it's a joint effort on two teams in the part of the Global Development Lab. So there's the digital development team, specifically digital data, and then there's the data and analytics team, which is the team that I'm on. And both of us are relatively young teams that have been formed with the creation of the lab, well, a little bit before, but now we're redefining somewhat also our basic structure and our purpose. And so as a part of this, one of the things we really wanted to understand was how data is used, because our basic mission is to promote the use of evidence in programming and programming decisions. And so we want to understand how we actually do that most effectively. And so Dane will go ahead and give some more in-depth background on the research methodologies, but the basic idea is that instead of just looking at processes or doing a more traditional consulting firm approach, we want to understand motivations, how people actually work in their daily, what like daily routine is, how things will actually sync with the way people are working now, rather than come up with some crazy idea on our own, not based on the reality on the ground. Is there anything that you'd like to add, Mark?
No, I think that's great. I think one of the things that we need to better understand is how people are actually using data on the ground, where the incentives, where the challenges, where the opportunities for our teams and the missions and the other operating units to work together to see if we can make better use of data. I think that will tie into better decision making for programs and hopefully make everybody's lives easier, both in the mission and maybe even in Washington, but hopefully certainly in the mission. So turn it over to Dane.
Hi, my name is Dane Roth. I work with Reboot, and we've been brought in to help out the Digital Development Lab on this project. So I'd like to today just let you know a little bit about Reboot, kind of the methods we use, and then more specifically our plan for this project that we currently have. And then I'd really like to leave some time to take questions from all of you. So I'll try and keep this short so we have plenty of time with questions, because I know you have lots of other things to deal with after I'm up here. So first off, as I said, I'm Dane. The company I work with is called Reboot. We're a social impact firm that's focused on inclusive development and accountable governance. We've worked in the past with groups like the World Bank, UNICEF, regional governments, and national governments, like that, on a wide range of projects. What really defines Reboot is our approach and our methodology. We firmly believe that people are at the center of every process that you deal with. They should be at the center of every program you develop. How that plays out in the way we do our work is we have 3 core principles that we really like to use in all of our approaches. So the first one is really about immersing yourself in whatever it is you're trying to understand or what you're trying to design for. How that's going to play out in this project is through the mission visits that we're doing. So we're going to beginning with this mission visit to the Uganda mission. Our intention there is to go in and really start interacting with the people who are at the core of the program cycle, at the core of running these activities, to understand what is their day-to-day like, what are their needs, how does the cycle work for them as people, and what are all these human elements which observation, working with implementing partners, working with staff, working with leadership at the mission. We've already begun by speaking with quite a few of you here at the USAID headquarters to get a sense of what are some of the systems in headquarters and how are those translated to the missions. So that's kind of one of our first principles, really immersing yourself in whatever problem you're trying to deal with. The second one is collaboration. We're here to help USAID figure out how it can better use data. So it's most important that things like the digital development are thoroughly involved in every step of this process. Same thing with the mission. At the end of the day, this project is for them, for the mission, for the people at HQ, to make sure that your jobs become easier through better use of data. So throughout this, we'll be collaborating with people from the mission. We'll be collaborating with people at HQ. We'll be collaborating with the digital development team. So the way that's going to play out is people from the mission will be incorporating our synthesis sessions. We'll be meeting with them. The mission Uganda has already taken a big role in kind of shaping the research plan. So we're making sure that as much as possible, we're bringing many people in who will be affected by this project to ensure that they have a chance to take a role in shaping it, because we really feel that that's important to ownership and the overall success of this. And the last principle that Reboot uses in all of its approaches is iteration. The first time you try something, it's not going to be perfect. That's all right. So the idea is to, improvise quickly, make adjustments, kind of roll with it, and then also set up our partners with the tools that they need to then keep that iteration process going. So coming out of this project that we're doing, we'll come up with some initial suggestions developed in collaboration with partners at the missions we visit, with the Digital Development Lab. And then after that, we'll be kind of beginning the iteration process and also just laying out a roadmap so that USAID can kind of take this and run with it themselves and make sure that whatever comes out of this process continues to be developed and shaped to the needs of the organization.
And if I could just add one comment that I really wanted to make clear and maybe didn't say in my initial introduction. So we realize that our teams are definitely not the only data stakeholders at USAID, and so one of the reasons why we wanted to present to you guys is to get input. We're also working to sync up with PPL and their learning agenda and some other efforts, but it's really, I think for us it's really key that there's a wider ownership than just our teams on the project.
Yeah. I think that's an absolutely key point. The collaboration element doesn't mean just Reboot collaborating with the Digital Development Lab and collaborating with the missions. It means making sure that whatever comes out of this really is situated in the larger USAID system. That's why we've done our best to begin to get an understanding of that and figure out, who needs to be brought to the table, who needs to be spoken to. I'm going to leave it there. Frankly, if there are more questions you have specifically about the approach, I'm happy to take them, but I'm really interested in giving all of you an opportunity to throw out some ideas you might have for things for this project, for us to look into and consider, and then also just leave it open to any questions you might have about what we're doing so we can provide further clarity. So with that, I'll leave it to all of you to lay it on me with your questions.
Can I just ask,
No, go for it.
what's, and maybe I just missed this in the overarching, but what's the long-term vision? What's the sort of, what do you expect to get done in the short, 6 months, 12 months? What are you guys working toward?
So in the immediate term, we have this current one mission visit plan with Uganda mission. Out of that, we're going to be coming out with sort of a mission brief, laying out what we found at that mission. Saying, okay, this is the situation as we saw it. In doing our research, they were trying to focus on two separate questions. One is, how do things work? So how does the program cycle work? How do these activities happen? Mm-hmm. And the second one is, why do they happen that way? So from these two levels, we're hoping to lay out a brief on this is what our findings were from this mission. We've talked about doing some other mission visits afterwards. We're going to be looking around for potential missions to partner with on that after we finish this Uganda one. So we'll have an initial readout from this mission, and then after that, we'll potentially be visiting other missions to kind of compare findings, do cross-analysis. And then out of that, we'll be developing sort of some suggestions and recommendations for how data or technology can better be introduced into the program cycle as we understand it, to address some of the issues that people have raised from our conversations with them, to address the needs that are surfaced through this.
I just have a question that you may have already covered, but I'm curious how much the focus is going to be on sort of the social interaction with data, like the squishier part of things, versus the systems approach, like what systems are in place, what systems are being used, which are not really useful.
Sure. I think both of those components are absolutely essential, and that's why we're trying to look at both of them. The first part would be the harder part, the systems, is kind of the how. So how are things going? What is set up? How should things work? How do they actually work? What are the systems that are in place to make sure they work the way that they should? And then from that, we're like, well, that's how it's supposed to work. How is it working? The squishier side of it, like what are people actually doing, and then understanding why is it squishing that way, so to say. Why aren't people using this system, but they are using this system? Why aren't people following procedures exactly, or why are they? So what are those incentives and disincentives to use data, and then also to kind of work with within these systems?
So, who within PPO have you been talking with or working with?
We've talked to both Cindy Clapp-Wincheck and Stacy Young, and I just forgot the M&E, the person heading up the M&E team. Mm-hmm. Those are the main three that we've interacted. Also with a little bit with Jeremiah Carew, seeing how this might interact with the aid tracker, mm-hmm. and Tony Pryor. Mm-hmm. So that range of people.
Cool. So that my colleagues are actually right now in the demo for aid tracker to learn a little bit more about that system, mm-hmm. and we have some more meetings later today with Jeremiah Carew and Tony Pryor to learn a little bit more about their interests and investment in this.
I think one question also for this group is, are there other folks that we should be talking to either before these guys go out into the field? It's going to happen very soon, or that would want to be looped in during that process, or as they come back from the TUI. There are other voices you think would be important for us to hear from or to reach out to.
So I had, go ahead.
Well, the answer to that question, I'm now in the management field, but I was with the health people for 1,000 years. The health people have backstop teams here in Washington, and I would suggest you try to get a hold of them, because very often in health anyway, the health teams do a health strategy before the mission or after the mission, and that's one of the things you'll see. I don't know how they did in Uganda. And then that strategy plays into the program cycle, and very often that strategy is backstopped here in Washington. So it'd be worth talking to them before you hit Uganda, and try Caitlin Pacherno in the Africa Bureau. She's been associated with that team for a long time. Hey, mention my name, she'll talk.
Okay. Thank you, Reggie. I would love suggestions for people we should speak to. Either if it's pressing, we can get on a call with them tomorrow before we leave. We can get on a call as soon as we hit Uganda. And then we're also planning on being back in headquarters when we get back from Uganda to do some follow-ups and kind of compare things we've heard of the Uganda mission. Given all of the stuff we've heard about the Uganda mission, it's often regarded as special or unique. So we'd love to compare the findings that we have there to what people feel in general. Is that representative of other people's experiences and other missions' experiences as well?
Can you just repeat the name there?
Caitlin Pacherno, Patirno. She's a program analyst in the Africa Bureau Health team, but at least when I was still in that team, she was sort of running the Uganda backstop team because they couldn't find anybody to go for global health to do it. And she spent a lot of time at the mission.
Have you had a chance to get on the program net to explore what's happening in terms of internal dialogue between working groups on ProgramNet around the program cycle issues that they're facing in the field? That may be a place to at least understand the issues that are facing the officers in the field as a consequence, and whether data can help inform their discussions.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
And, it may be a value added at some point for you to take the program cycle training just so you understand all the iterative processes.
That would be great. We'll try to set that up for when we get back. Thank you so much.
Allowed to, or if CO or
We've worked on that. It was complicated, but we can revisit that issue. It's not as easy as it
But the team is also not totally unfamiliar with the program cycle. I mean, there have been some initial conversations a couple of weeks ago where we had somebody come in and do an hour and a half.
We're doing a little bit more of that today as well, kind of following up with people who give such trainings. So getting our shortened version of such training where we can.
So are you doing sort of time use surveys, or that's going to be purely through the interviews in the lab?
Currently what we have planned for in the Uganda mission is we're certainly going to be doing some observations and some shadowing. We're working with our contact team to make sure that we're not asking too much of the people there. So we have a meeting with her on Monday before we actually go into the mission to speak a little bit more in detail about what are people's schedules looking like over the 3 weeks that we'll be there. Because we just want to make sure that we're not overburdening people too much. We're certainly considering issues like that. That's something we're kind of going back and forth with Lane around and making sure that she's taking as large a role as possible in shaping the research, and to make sure that it's understanding and accommodating of the pressures faced by the
I think your question was more like what percentage of people's time do they spend on different activities, correct?
Yeah.
So, and I think the answer is yes, we do want to learn about that. So
we're interested in learning about that in terms of doing a formal survey for it. We haven't settled on that at this point. And we want to make sure we're talking to Lane about any of these issues before.
Because Lane and I worked on attempting to, there was a project, KDMD, the Knowledge-Driven Microenterprise Development Project, which with PPL developed 2 surveys for USAID operating units, one about time use and one around whether an operating unit was had a learning environment, and tried to provide this as a service to others. I think only Microenterprise Development Office took them up on it, so I know that those 2 surveys still exist. They were only developed maybe about a year ago. So you can probably pull that if you want to utilize that as a starting point.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. I mean, Lane's been very helpful so far with sort of providing some of the information that she is able to about a lot of the past research that's been done, so that we're sure we're not asking people the same questions they were asked 6 months ago. So we've been very cognizant of that, but I'll be sure to ask her specifically about that survey.
There was someone we just shared from Becky, somebody in the future, about a similar survey. I have a similar. Anyway, go ahead and ask your question.
So, as missions learn of this project, what do you find is sort of the incentive for missions to engage? What do you find is that catch that says, yeah, we really want to participate in this?
So far, the Uganda mission has been the one we've had the most contact with about actually discussing going there. And the big thing that we made sure from the beginning, like I was saying, Lane was involved both in what's going to come out of this, to make sure that it meets and answers some of the questions that they have at the mission. They recently finished a minor evaluation and learning assessment, and from that they were able to cover a lot of information on how things are done, and we're hoping to work with them to kind of build on that, like, okay, you were able to get this far with that study, how can we take you a few extra steps to give you a better understanding of what's going on in your mission, how you can get back to it. So we're working very closely with them to make sure that they are getting some value add by asking them and getting them involved in that, the design of the research process.
And I'm sorry, just to clarify in my own mind, you are investigating through this ethnographic process specifically how mission personnel use data in their daily work processes and within the program cycle itself, not necessarily how implementing partners are reporting, which creates the data, which lives, and then they can ultimately tap that data, but rather the process that the personnel at mission level go through that involves data.
We actually would be studying both of those elements, because the real key point of this research is to understand the program cycle and how decisions are made in the process, whether or not data is used. We're looking for opportunities to input more, have data and technology used in those decision-making processes better. That's our goal. What we're trying to understand is, how is it currently done? What is the landscape?
So are you talking to the program officers and after you go on a mission?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so certainly the focus is on how the folks in the mission, the actual USAID staff, are using the data, but we do realize that a lot of the data is owned by the implementing partners, and through their processes, they're actually significant influencers on how USAID can use it. So, I mean, that is part of the meetings and sort of the interviews and the ethnographic process that these folks can get on the ground to meet those partners and understand that process as well.
Understood.
We're really trying to understand the landscape so we know what all of the factors are involved, so therefore we can best identify these opportunities to make things easier.
So, Stephen Jarrett came in when you guys were here last week and gave us sort of our briefing on the program cycle and the structural difficulties, not just socially why it's difficult, but the physical back-end infrastructure of USAID, how there's 5 different buckets of how information is managed. Are you working with our CIO office on those issues and what policies need to be changed, or just tools need to be given so that those systems can talk with each other?
At this point, we haven't really gone into what we'll be doing to policy. We're focused mostly on, at this point in the study, what is going on at the mission level. So when Steve Jarrett came in, very informative about how the process works, and we've been following up with some other people around their perspectives on that same system to get a better understanding of that. But at this point in the process, we're not reaching out to any of the policymakers or any issues like that.
Okay. And then I'd also just offer that because we do have a new policy that is prescriptive on how data is supposed to be reported and collected from implementing partners, that you're familiar with that.
Yes.
So that when you do talk to, I mean, it would be great if you guys can multiply for the 3 weeks that you're there and you're talking with implementing partners to vet out what the, to vet what we've put up because of the executive order.
That'll be fantastic. I've heard about the new data order coming out, and I'm very excited to sort of see how that will play in.
So you're talking about specifically the sections in the ADS, that, or is there something else?
So, I mean, maybe it's worth transitioning to the other part of the meeting where we actually talk about the executive order and data policies and what we've been, and sort of that progress, because I think the requirements that are coming in to our implementers relate directly to how they collect and report data. So there's the existing, but then it's also preparing future relationships and what that's going to look like. And so gathering that information so that transition is as painless as possible and is actually designed and directed by the people that are actually closest to the information would be really useful.
So I think that maybe we can see if there are any other final
I
questions
don't know
or comments.
You work with the Phoenix a lot. I remember when we first talked to this, that was one of those sort of structural issues that you had with how to operate in your own work. I don't know if you have any Okay.
Sure what you mean.
Yeah, you sort of showed me all the crazy reporting.
Any final questions?
Just one person you might want to talk to, one group that's very keen on getting data into the USAID process. It's struggled, but we have a lot of data. Is the FuseNet crowd?
FuseNet?
They've hired an outside person, is Jerry Brown,
Okay.
who's been actually going to missions and working with them on developing CBCSs and putting that into pads and stuff like that. But he's really kind of wanting to understand how do you, this, 20 plus years of data, get missions to actually utilize it and think about it or incorporate it.
Thank you. Great. Anything else? Great. I'm just going to put my email address up here in case anyone has any questions or comments. Please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to provide any further information I can about this project.
You all may be doing this in the field, but do you have a survey, not just about time, but just in general, like here are the basic questions that we would be asking?
We have a general question guide, which we're using now for the mission. A lot of it is adapted to who we're working with. It hasn't been finalized yet because we've been going back and forth with Lane, and she's been putting some inputs, but we want to make sure that we sit down with her and talk through it, which is what we're intending to do on Monday. And we'll have a general question guide finalized with her. DKAN@reboot.org. Again, please feel free to reach out with any questions or comments or further leads. We're always happy for the people to contact and more information to help us in this process.
And we'd like, it would be interesting to link up with the sorts of things that you guys are already thinking about. So I'm hoping that when we come back, we can also do some synthesis work together to extract insights, because I imagine this is similar to knowledge management issues in for food security or global health, or to a certain extent, like even for instance, getting program information on the programs we're going to be studying was challenging for us at USAID, and so so that data is just not easily available.
I guess that maybe to that end, if you could share your email address as well, and maybe an additional point of contact.
Well, if there are no further questions for me, thank you very much for your time. Look forward to learning more about your work.
Cool. Thanks.
Geez. You.
No one else is about that.
But you have a USAID.
Yeah.
I noticed.
Okay, so just next on the agenda, just a few updates to share with you all about open data and the executive order on machine readable data, so not solely focused on open. So we have a few of the data stewards in the room. Do you have anything you want to pick off from a data steward perspective?
I've got a couple items whenever you're ready.
Okay, go ahead.
So I'm Brad Pachowski from the Bureau for Management, helping coordinate open data at USAID. Just for those who are following open data as a whole, a couple of updates. I had already alluded to the fact that we do have a draft policy that we've drafted on development data at USAID and how we manage really the process from data creation to the point of data publication, insofar as data publication is actually appropriate for that data. So we've received numerous comments from operating units. It's an incredibly complex issue. There are many flavors of data, almost as many as we have flavors of money nowadays. We know how difficult that is to manage. But everything from data that is submitted to scientific databases to those that inform scientific publications to entire databases that in theory could be made public but contain data both from USAID and from non-USAID donors, and databases that may need APIs created to better access the data, and yet we don't necessarily have a process for approving APIs in USAID. So there's a mound of issues to work through in terms of creating guidance on this issue.
Does everybody know what an API is?
So even if they don't, application programming interface, and I am not nearly as techy as several in the room, but it's just a method of machine-to-machine connection, so you can actually automatically pull data from the system to create your own applications. But all that said,
and where's the draft policy? That's the one on GitHub, or?
That is ADS 579 on development data that's gone through the formal ADS clearance process. But we really needed that clearance process to bring some of these issues to the surface. You know, this has been a draft, and the procurement language that would actually guide implementing partners on submitting data to USAID has been a draft since about August of last year. And despite even that circulation, there are issues that continue to come to the surface on this. So I anticipate we still have probably a good month or two of work ahead of us in terms of hammering out these issues that have been raised by various operating units, all of which are very valid, and we're eager to address them. So we don't have, you know, revised policies yet. Frankly, I was on annual leave last week, and I've got to be honest, I did not take the policy with me to the beach, although I was tempted. I wanted to preserve my sanity. And we just got the consolidated comments, like really, you know, a few days before I jumped on an airplane. So that's really sort of on my big to-do list for really now and over the next month. So that's one update on the policy. I know
so how much has that been circulated and feedback been solicited from mission?
That has been submitted. So in terms of mission feedback, that mission feedback is gained to the extent that Washington operating units circulated to missions. So right now, the way it was circulated, that's very standard through the ADS clearance process. Right now, when something's submitted through ADS clearance, it goes to specific POCs within the operating units. Those POCs within the operating units determine to what extent this particular ADS chapter should go to the missions. The chapter was also circulated to data stewards, many of whom are in the room right now, who also had the opportunity to circulate it to the missions as well. Given the workload on missions, there are some things that we're moving strongly out to missions, some that we really want to route through Washington first because they are advocating on missions' behalf. We want to get some of those mission issues really nailed down first and really ironed out before we really start raising, you know, sort of the voice level at missions, given the workload that's already on them with other implementations, program cycle type issues, strategies that are required to implement, aid tracker implementations, and that sort of thing. So really our next steps are to iron out the specific issues that we received and then really engage in a broad-based outreach campaign. This is not something that's really optional for agencies at this point. What we found, and I'm going to make a quick parallel to aid tracker for those of you who are familiar with it, there was a lot of work done on aid tracker at the outset in terms of setting up a framework that was viable, in terms of capturing data and really ensuring that they had a viable framework in place before even socializing and beginning to roll things out. And that's why things have been on the open data front at some level really focused on getting the underlying infrastructure in place first. So there's a lot of work being done on systems development, on process development, on policy development, that sort of thing. Make sure you've got a structure in place before just kind of going helter-skelter on implementation.
Are you trying to do any of the, like, the participatory, you know, we've just endorsed this new framework for ICT for the design, which is participatory design. I'm curious how much of that has been. Has any of that been utilized?
I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, if you got, I mean, we have had some outreach. Roy, you can probably speak to that. Some of our outreach to various missions on data is on Ghana, Uganda, et cetera.
Well, the only one who we talked to really on the requirements is Uganda.
Yeah, and that's sort of why I was asking about the hook on the data ethnography study, because again, we've tried to reach out, and what essentially happens is actually getting that traction is difficult. Once we start, this is a mandate, however, and once people realize it's a mandate, we'll get that traction regardless.
When people get nervous, then they'll let you know what they think.
Yeah, and so and that's really what happened. That's really what happened with that's what happened with the ADS process as well. These materials were out circulating for a good deal of time before that. When things really started to come to the surface, when people realized, whoa, this may become policy, we need to find a response on it. So we have tried to reach out to missions, but that hook, just hadn't quite been there yet. So we're going to continue to do that. Again, we have, executive sponsorship at the DAA and AA level on this. And so the next step is going to be broad-based agency outreach. But again, we want to get as many of these contentious issues ironed out first, so we make that a little easier.
So.
Did you have something, Jill? It looked like I was saying comment.
No, I'm just turning.
Sure. Sorry, Pat, did you have anything to add? The one other thing I had to add on that is just that, again, I mentioned APIs briefly, and I think several of us in the room are aware that we need APIs to USAID funded data in a big way. This is new to the agency, especially approving APIs that are created and managed by third parties. Just want to let folks know in the room who've been dealing with this, whether it's with Stat Compiler or EMDAT or whatever it may be, that I am reaching out to NCIO directly on this, seeing if we can get some traction on getting a standardized process hammered out on this. Because I know folks have been working on this diligently from the program side, that we're trying to get a formal process in place on the API side as well. So wanted to let folks know about that. Finally, actually, ultimately, in terms of aid tracker, I know that's been bandied about several times, which also ties into the concept of the Development Information Solution, DIS, which many of you have heard about, which is the idea that really there's no single system within the agency or single mechanism by which we can understand who's doing what, where, with what funding, at what period of time at the executive level. So even a congressional inquiry on what we're doing in Syria is met with a massively inefficient data call that spreads out throughout the agency. So the idea behind the Development Information Solution will be that we do have a comprehensive way of managing our data that is program cycle driven, so that sort of ties in very much to what's going on here. But there is definitely movement on that in the sense that we're looking at the aid tracker implementations agency-wide to really create the initial framework for a development information solution that would be used both to manage the program cycle and related data, both for centrally funded programs here in Washington and in the mission. So we are looking at potential aid tracker rollouts even in DC that would be customized for Washington operating units. The big question mark right now is we don't know where the delta is between aid tracker needs in the field and the missing piece that's needed for aid tracker Washington. So that's something that's still being worked out. But that would essentially begin serving as the framework for DIS, and that is moving forward. Yeah, please.
Who's able to volunteer for the DC?
Piece of that? That's a really good question. I would suggest contacting Jeremiah Guru on that. Right now, DIS is co-chaired by PPL, BRM, and him. And in terms of volunteering and wanting aid tracker, I think there's a lot of encouragement that continues to be validated, and it's mission-driven, it's operating unit-driven. Capacity is the big question right now. So as much as operating units may want to participate, agency capacity to continue to roll out at that pace is very, very limited. That's definitely being looked at from a funding perspective, all the way up to the administrator level. But I think we're looking at closer to FY15 before we start seeing a serious look at the money. That is, and by the way, DIS is on a 5-year implementation plan, so this is not something that's going to happen, obviously. This is enterprise-wide. Sorry.
Looking at that as an option, because we've got offices within DFS who want something like that, who's talking about those particular needs, and the options on the table right now are either create our own, again, which we're wanting to avoid, mimic free, which has something that is fairly close there, guide your technical services, or, hopefully fully aid tracker.
Right.
Because RP, the future monitoring system, is really indicator kind of based and external partners and all that kind of other stuff, and doesn't really capture a lot of that. As you were saying, how much are we, who is doing what in Syria and how much are we spending, or
Right.
something like that, which especially for our research unit, who has probably 2/3 of our portfolio in terms of research projects to the CA system and to universities and things like that, that would be like a boon to them. So,
Yeah, and that's an excellent point. And E3 is even they're asking for aid tracker. Global Health is interested in it. And not surprisingly, these are some of the biggest, most complex operating units in DC. It would be nice to start with an easier, smaller operating unit, but some bigger operating units have the real data-driven needs right now. So. The final update is just many folks are aware that there was an open data benchmark as of May 31st to open date, whatever, spoonerism almost, to update our open data listing, our public data listing at usa.gov/data. So you will find updated data there, new data sets actually from .gov.FP now, several baseline data sets that are up there for, what is it, Roy? Uganda and
Nigeria.
yeah, Nigeria,
Guatemala.
thank you, that are now there, along with South Sudan's baseline data set. Updated data for now points to the Foreign Assistance Dashboard, dollars to results. And if you're not familiar with the fact that we have an API for the Development Experience Clearinghouse, that does exist as well, which you can find on usa.gov/develop. That's all I got.
Yeah. Can you speak really quickly to the USAID Open Government Plan that's been circulating? We've had to comment on regarding what that's about. It kind of came as a surprise to me, and just the open data section seemed a bit confusing. Like a lot of people put a lot of information into it. I thought your email. I went back to your email where you described the governance structure was really helpful in setting a framework. That was my recommendation, that we go back to that governance structure so that people understand what we're trying to achieve, what the governance structure is, and what the roles and responsibilities and needs each governance structure is, and what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I can speak to that very briefly, and Roy, you may want to chime in. That's why Roy laughed.
I don't want to chime in. I'll embarrass myself and everybody else around me.
Broadly read, open data is a subset of OpenGov, which I think a lot of people recognize. Within the Open Government Plan, what a lot of people didn't see is that there were specific OMB guidelines on what had to be in the plan. And so that constrained us a little bit on how that section was structured. I obviously came to think of the way I wrote that email, and that's what I would, I guess, like to put in there. But what we're actually required to put in there is a little bit different. It hits some specific key areas that may have not as logically flowed as we would have liked them to. So that's really what that was all about. At the same time, we still tried to hit the fact that yes, we do have a governance body. Yes, we are looking at information management from the systems perspective. Yes, we are rolling out our data sets, on a regular basis. Our hands are a little bit tied. One thing I did forget to mention, if I can chime in just for one more moment, is in terms of data stewards, several folks have commented we need a scope of work, obviously, for data stewards. Just prior to my going on leave, we did craft really a draft, and really kudos to Kat on that. She put together the initial draft, and to the InfoGov working group that's been working on this, received several comments on that. Ideally, we'd like to circulate a draft to data stewards sometime next week, probably, and then we get data steward feedback on that based on what we've heard from you so far on that. Again, things are still gonna, we've still got a couple months on the actual ADS policy, but getting this data steward thing clarified, I think will help as well. So we'd like to circulate that next week or so.
We have a few comments, as we heard from the first data steward union person, is that you all need some tools to arm yourself with. So, case studies and talking points. We have those. Those are in the shared comments folder. We're happy to add more. We have the FAQs. We don't want to overwhelm you all with too much information that it just becomes something that you wouldn't be able to communicate. And then we also heard that you really need top cover. So I think the statement of work is there to be aware of what kind of time is needed for a data steward, and we assume that groups like BFS will continue to come back and say this is a 3-person job and this is a 2-person job, and that doesn't even begin to scale out to mission by mission. But as Brandon said, this is DAA and AA level supported, and we do have that kind of top cover. I just don't think it's been well communicated because of the governance structure. So fear not, but continue to engage so that we're very clear about what kind of burden we have. We have about 7 more minutes, so I just want to give a brief update and just a recap of engagement and the kind of transparency of the process. I had asked, how has this been inclusive? So we send out emails and host committees to talk about ADS and who wants to clear, who has input that they'd like to have. The development data library did go around and have these meetings with many different groups and teams, and we have as many of you know, a DKAN pilot that should be live for internal testing on June 16th. So some of you have signed up for that. Happy to have others who would like to. And that's going to be the intention there is an easier interface of what is currently /data, which is just a laundry list of data sets, which is useful, but it's not necessarily user-friendly and doesn't really get the message across of why everybody should care and get excited about the fact that there's raw and detailed data that we're getting out to the public. What I'm excited about, and I think many of you are familiar with Project Open Data, which is a GitHub site. It's an open, public, and collaborative website, and it's pointed to in an executive order, which is just fascinating to me. So we have this federal policy that is consistently updated based on recommendations and user feedback from people that are most directly affected. So we have that mirrored on USAID's GitHub site. We need our own implementation guidance. It has very specific implementation guidance on how to approach the executive order, everything from your stock language of terms of service and how to write an API to here is a chief data officer role that we think would be really useful for this. So we have our own implementation guidance. I think we've got a few people who are interested in leading on that. Would love help and interest on you all. We can do trainings on GitHub for anybody who would like them, just be a bit more interactive. So what's interesting about this is it's one place where when you're hearing back from implementing partners and they're saying, look, if you're going to ask me to do this, this is the kind of guidance I need from you, or I need you to know how this is going to affect my work, how many hours it's going to take, how it's going to disrupt the systems that I've had in place for years. Like, we want to document that as publicly as possible so that other people can say, I'm facing that same issue, or I'm facing that same issue, and here's the solution that I'm coming up with. So building that community of practice is really important. And then just practically speaking, we have these like tools that convert PDFs to XML to other open formats so that we can comply strictly with the executive order. So I think those are the big pieces there. And then I'll also just reiterate, there are a few listservs that I sent out in this email, and I know that I forwarded to you all these collab sessions that happen at GSA every week from 2 to 4 p.m. So you can bring any issue that you want to work on, or they sometimes have running collaborative issues. And that's a way to plug into people who've been working on this for a while and who are experts in this field. So, for example, API guidance language. Many other agencies have already worked on that and built that up themselves. We don't need to do this in our own vacuum.
So before we wrap up, I just wanted to add that we have constraints obviously on the amount of time and the scope that we can engage with in our study, and so I can make no promises, right? But if there are specific questions that people have, I wish I knew X. that would be actually really helpful to know. So, or like a limited understanding of like what you would like feedback on, and we could take that up and try to explore it, or at least talk about doing that. So how it would look and how it would be. So please feel free to email me, or just if you have thoughts now in the final minutes or whatever.
And just over here to introduce Everett Samantha, who's going to be the research manager on this project. That colleague I mentioned earlier. But yes, if you do have any questions, like Augusta said, we can't promise that we'll be able to address it, especially in this mission, given our scope of work. But we'd love to hear any feedback or insights that you have for the project.
I think one thing that I would be really interested in addition to it's just great to understand your model, again, from how you're articulating it, but in the agile world, do you have just a site where you're saying, here's our process, and here are the questions we're asking, and here's how we're going forward? Do you have any sort of real-time update? Here's the kind of feedback we're getting. That would be really interesting to have accessible, so that while you're there, I mean, it's still live to have a TDY, yeah? And so we would like to take advantage of the fact that you're already there and already in these conversations, even if it's just one question about open data. So, so I don't know if that works with your process to be able to share sort of a summary of what's happening, but I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah, it would be interesting to know, I guess, a little bit more around how it might best deliver that.
If you have daily summaries that you send out to your team, or that you sort of, like, do you guys have daily or every other day you meet and just say, like, here's what we learned today?
Yeah, and so we go through a daily process with the team. It's very much kind of understanding what's happening. We have today what that means for strategies. Now, it is 100% offline, and there are concerns around kind of sharing while they're in progress, because they lead in different directions. So all the concerns about privacy and things like that. And it also may be a challenge to digitize things as well, as an optimal process. But I do like the idea of making sure that we're able to feedback more and in a way that's digestible for you guys, interesting for others. And so maybe we can talk more about the problem and what actually made it interesting and digestible.
Yeah, other people have done a lot of thinking on real time feedback because of agile design. So okay. Does anybody have anything else that they want to raise? Concerns? The mobiles team or digital team just told us about Tech Tuesday happening Tuesday morning. So I'll send that around when we do the meeting notes and summary so that you all know other reasons.
Next adventure.
So I'm going to spend all morning with you on Thursday.
I said you should take a look at what's interesting and so how are you? No, it's not mine. It's Mother's Tea.
Go ahead and